The color drained from Howard Stark's face as he collapsed onto the marble floor of the hospital wing that bore his name. 3 minutes earlier, those same lips, now gasping for air, had curved into a cruel smile as he'd announced to the entire nurses' station, "I don't care if she is 20 degrees. I won't have someone like her touching me." Zora Jackson felt something crack inside her chest as every head turned. 22 pairs of eyes witnessing her public humiliation. Not one person spoke up. Not even her supervisor, who now studied his shoes with sudden fascination. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at County General," Howard had continued, his voice carrying deliberately. "They have plenty of your demographic. This hospital was built for excellence." The words had sliced deeper than any surgical knife Zora had ever handled. 18 years of education, sacrifice, and exceptional service reduced to the color of her skin in 10 devastating seconds. Now that same man lay dying at her feet, his expensive cologne mixing with the acrid scent of his own sweat as his heart betrayed him. The crowded hallway had become a frozen tableau. Security guards with useless earpieces, administrators clutching clipboards to their chests, and Howard's personal physician, Dr. Phillips, standing paralyzed with a half-written prescription still in his hand. Only Zora moved. She dropped to her knees beside the man who'd just destroyed her dignity, her fingers finding the weak, irregular pulse at his neck. The Italian silk suit that had made him look so imposing now twisted beneath him like crumpled gift wrap, revealing the fragile body inside. "V-Tach progressing to V-Fib," she announced, already tearing open his custom shirt. Pearl buttons scattered across the marble like tiny projectiles. "Crash cart now." No one responded. She looked up to find them all staring, not helping, just watching, as if this were theater rather than a man actively dying. "If someone doesn't get me a defibrillator in the next 10 seconds, your billionaire donor dies right here." Her voice cracked like a whip across the lobby. As a nurse finally sprinted for the equipment, Zora began compressions, feeling Stark's sternum bend slightly beneath her palms. With each downward thrust, she pushed away the echoes of his words, the burning humiliation still fresh as acid on her skin. "Move back," she commanded, her voice carrying an authority that had been dismissed just minutes before. The same people who had averted their eyes when he'd humiliated her now watched in stunned silence as she took control. The hospital's gleaming floors reflected the chaos. Security guards with panicked faces, administrators clutching clipboards to their chests, and Howard's personal physician standing useless and pale against the wall. The scent of the billionaire's expensive cologne mixed with the antiseptic air as Zora pressed her fingers to his neck, finding a pulse that fluttered weakly beneath her touch. "Hello, my lovelies at Ducal Tales. I hope you're all having a beautiful day, whether you're watching from your cozy bed or during your lunch break. Have you joined our Ducal family yet? If not, hit that subscribe button to never miss a moment of these powerful stories." Behind her, she caught fragments of panicked whispers. "Should we really let her? Isn't there someone more qualified? If he dies under her care?" With each compression, Zora made a choice. A choice to be better than the man beneath her hands. A choice to honor her oath despite the man who had dishonored her humanity minutes before. Zora blocked out the voices, focusing only on the failing body before her. Years of training, of double-proving herself, of excelling despite the doubters. It all condensed into this moment. The same hands he had looked at with naked contempt were now the only thing standing between him and death. A nurse appeared with the crash cart, eyes wide with panic. Zora grabbed the defibrillator paddles with steady hands as Howard's body began to convulse. The machines around them began to scream warnings as his heart rhythm deteriorated further. "Clear," she shouted, pressing the paddles to his bare chest. His body arched upward, then fell still. The monitor continued its erratic display. Zora felt sweat beading along her hairline, the weight of a dozen stairs burning into her back. The same room where he had questioned her humanity now hung on her every move. The irony wasn't lost on her, but there was no satisfaction in it, only the desperate determination to keep this man alive despite everything. As she prepared for a second shock, a terrible question flashed through her mind. Would he rather die than live knowing a black woman was the only reason his heart still beat? Hours later, Zora Jackson sat alone in the staff break room, her untouched coffee growing cold between her trembling hands. The adrenaline had finally worn off, leaving her body drained, but her mind racing. She'd saved Howard Stark's life, the same man who had looked at her with undisguised contempt just moments before his collapse. 18 years of nursing, 2 advanced degrees, and countless lives saved. Yet she still encountered men like Stark who saw only her skin color first, her gender second, and her professional qualifications last, if at all. Zora took a deep breath, remembering her grandmother's words. "Your excellence is your resistance." Those words had carried her through medical school while working nights, through every condescending doctor, through every patient who'd requested someone else when she entered their room. The door swung open, and Dr. Elena Romanoff strode in, her usual confident gait now tinged with exhaustion. The cardiac surgeon dropped into the chair across from Zora, her dark eyes meeting her friend's. "You saved his stubborn ass," Elena said, running a hand through her copper hair. The angiogram confirmed it. 90% blockage in his left anterior descending artery. Widowmaker, heart attack waiting to happen. If you hadn't recognized the signs so quickly. Zora's throat tightened. Any decent nurse would have done the same. "Bullshit," Elena countered sharply. "I'll watch you from the doorway." Everyone else was paralyzed. Even his precious Dr. Phillips, with all his Ivy League credentials and country club connections, stood there useless as a hood ornament. A small smile tugged at Zora's lips despite herself. Elena had a gift for cutting through pretense. One of the reasons they bonded during the long overnight shifts when Zora had first started at Manhattan Memorial 5 years ago. "Is he stable?" Zora asked, her professional concern overriding personal feelings. "For now. They've moved him to the cardiac ICU. He'll need surgery tomorrow." Elena leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And guess who's scheduled to perform it?" Zora's eyes widened. "You?" "The very same. Ironic, isn't it? The 2 women he probably would have dismissed out of hand are now responsible for keeping his heart beating." Elena's smile faded. Administration is in full panic mode. Harrison is practically living in Stark's room, apologizing for the unfortunate incident earlier. Zora's jaw tightened. Chief Administrator William Harrison had stood silent during Stark's tirade, more concerned with the billionaire's 8-figure donations than the dignity of his staff. "Of course he is," Zora murmured, her fingers tightening around her mug. The door swung open again, and nurse practitioner Michael Keaton entered, his kind face creased with concern. Unlike many of their colleagues, Michael had never treated Zora as anything less than an equal, becoming both mentor and friend during her early days at the hospital. "There she is, the woman of the hour," he said, his gentle voice at odds with his imposing frame. "You okay, Jackson? That was intense." "I'm fine," she replied automatically, the response worn smooth from years of use whenever things were anything but fine. Michael gave her a knowing look as he poured himself coffee. "Harrison wants to see you in his office." Zora's stomach clenched. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." Michael hesitated. "Stark's family is here. His daughter, Natasha. She's asking questions about what happened." Zora had read about Natasha Stark in the society pages. Brilliant MIT graduate following in her father's footsteps, though reportedly estranged from him in recent years. The tabloids painted her as the rebellious heiress who had rejected her father's corporate empire to pursue humanitarian work. "What kind of questions?" Zora asked. "The kind that suggest she doesn't buy the sanitized version Harrison is selling." Michael sat beside her. "Look, I've known you since you first walked through those doors. You've saved more lives in this hospital than most of the doctors combined. But Stark has connections everywhere, and you embarrassed him today by being better than everyone else when it mattered." Beneath Michael's concern lurked a deeper truth they both understood. In their world, excellence wasn't always rewarded equally. Sometimes it was punished. Elena reached across the table, her surgeon's hand steady as they covered Zora's. "Whatever happens, we have her back." Zora nodded, grateful for their support but aware of the realities. Her mother hadn't raised a fool. Single parenthood had taught Delilah Jackson to be pragmatic about the world's injustices while never surrendering to them. She'd instilled that same resilience in her daughter. Zora had chosen nursing not just because she excelled at the sciences, but because she remembered the black nurse who had cared for her grandmother during her final days, the only medical professional who had treated the dying woman with dignity. That memory had lit a path Zora had followed ever since, despite the obstacles. Now, as she contemplated facing Harrison tomorrow, she felt the familiar weight of having to be twice as good to get half as far. The unfairness of it burned, but she refused to let it consume her. "I should check on Mrs. Rodriguez in 310 before my shift ends," Zora said, rising from her chair. She was anxious about her bypass follow-up. As she gathered her things, her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter, Zuri. A simple message, "Ace the chem test," accompanied by a beaming selfie. Pride swelled in Zora's chest. At 17, Zuri was already applying to pre-med programs, determined to become a doctor despite seeing firsthand the challenges her mother faced. "That girl of yours is going to change the world," Michael noted, glimpsing the message over her shoulder. "She already has," Zora replied softly, tucking the phone away. Her daughter was her center, her motivation on the hardest days. As she headed toward the door, Elena called after her. "Zora, remember what you told me when I botched my first solo surgery and thought my career was over?" Zora paused, remembering that night 3 years ago when she'd found Elena crying in this same break room. "Our worth isn't measured by their recognition," Zora quoted her own words. "It's measured by the lives we touch." Elena nodded. "Exactly. And today, you touched the life of the most powerful man in New York, whether he deserved it or not." As Zora walked through the gleaming corridors of the hospital wing that Howard Stark's money had built, she couldn't shake the image of his face in those critical moments. Not the arrogant mask he'd worn while belittling her, but the vulnerable, terrified expression as death had reached for him. In that moment, all his wealth, power, and privilege had meant nothing. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. For now, she had patients who needed her, people who mattered just as much as any billionaire, even if the world didn't see them that way. And somewhere in the cardiac ICU, Howard Stark lay recovering, unaware that his life now rested in the hands of 2 women he would have dismissed without a second thought. "Nurse Jackson, a word?" Zora had just finished checking Mrs. Rodriguez's vitals when Chief Administrator Harrison's voice cut through the quiet hospital corridor like a blade. She turned to find him standing there in his immaculate suit, his expression unreadable beneath the fluorescent lights. "I thought our meeting was tomorrow morning," she said, sliding her pen into her pocket. Harrison glanced around nervously. "Plans have changed. Mr. Stark is asking for you." The words hung in the air between them, unexpected and heavy with implication. Zora felt her pulse quicken. "For me? Specifically, by name?" Harrison's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ms. Stark mentioned you were the one who intervened during her father's episode." "I was just doing my job," Zora replied evenly. Harrison's gaze sharpened. "Let me be clear, Nurse Jackson. Howard Stark's continued goodwill is crucial to this hospital. Whatever he wants to say to you, whether it's an apology or he left the alternative unspoken, I expect you to handle it with the utmost professionalism." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Zora straightened her spine, drawing herself up to her full height. "I always do, Mr. Harrison." As they walked toward the VIP wing, Zora's mind raced through possibilities. Was Stark planning to double down on his humiliation? Did he resent being saved by someone he deemed inferior? Or worse, did he want to offer some patronizing gratitude that would somehow make his earlier behavior acceptable? Harrison stopped outside the private suite. "Remember, Nurse Jackson, discretion." Before she could respond, the door opened, revealing a woman with intelligent eyes and an air of contained intensity. Natasha Stark. In person, she looked both more approachable and more formidable than her magazine photo suggested. "You must be Nurse Jackson," she said, her voice carrying the same authority as her father's, but without the entitled edge. "I've been hoping to meet you." "Ms. Stark," Zora acknowledged with a professional nod. Please, come in. Natasha stepped aside, then turned to Harrison. That will be all, William. Harrison's face flushed at the dismissal, but he retreated without protest. The door closed behind Zora with a soft click that somehow felt like the sealing of fate. The private room was larger than some apartments Zora had lived in, tastefully decorated to disguise its clinical purpose. Howard Stark lay against the raised bed, his complexion ashen, tubes and wires connecting him to monitors that beeped steadily. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his expensive suit and commanding presence. Standing by the window was a man Zora didn't recognize, tall with piercing blue eyes that assessed her with quiet intensity. He wore the casual confidence of wealth, but something about his stance suggested military training. Nurse Jackson, Natasha gestured toward her. This is James Rhodes, my father's oldest friend and the only person he trusts besides himself. James stepped forward, extending his hand. Thank you for what you did today. Not many people would have acted so decisively. His handshake was firm, his manner direct but warm. Unlike Howard or Harrison, he looked at her as a professional first, without the dismissive once-over she'd grown accustomed to. There was respect in his eyes, something rare enough that Zora found herself momentarily caught off guard. Just doing my job, Mr. Rhodes, she replied, regaining her composure. James, please, he corrected, a subtle smile softening his features. Howard told us what happened before his collapse. Both what he said to you and what you did afterward. A weak voice interrupted from the bed. Are you all quite finished discussing me, as if I'm not here? Howard Stark's eyes were open, alert despite the medication. His gaze fixed on Zora with an intensity that made her want to step back. Instead, she moved forward, professional instincts taking over as she checked the monitors. Your vitals are stable, Mr. Stark, she reported. How's your pain level? Howard studied her face, something almost like confusion flickering across his features. He seemed less commanding than bewildered, as if trying to reconcile the woman he'd dismissed with the one who'd save his life. Manageable, he finally answered, his voice lacking its earlier arrogance. Everyone out. I need to speak with Nurse Jackson alone. James and Natasha exchanged concerned glances. Dad, you need to rest, Natasha protested. I'll rest when I'm dead. Howard snapped, then winced at his own choice of words. Which almost happened today, as everyone keeps reminding me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Natasha looked to Zora. You don't have to do this. The protective gesture from a woman she'd just met caught Zora off guard. She glanced at the monitors again, assessing. 5 minutes should be fine. I'll call if anything changes. As James passed, he gave her a reassuring nod. We'll be right outside. When the door closed, silence filled the room, punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Howard Stark studied her face with unsettling intensity. You saved my life, he finally stated, his voice rougher than before. Zora maintained her professional demeanor. I did what any nurse would do. No, he countered sharply. My personal physician froze. Security panicked. Even Harrison was useless. But you, the woman I had insulted not 5 minutes earlier, you didn't hesitate. He shifted in the bed, wincing with the effort. What? The question hung between them, deceptively simple, yet loaded with complexity. Zora chose her words carefully. Because that's who I am, Mr. Stark. That's who I've always had to be. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or discomfort. I misjudged you, he admitted, the words seemingly difficult for him. That doesn't happen often. Before he could continue, the door burst open. Dr. Phillips rushed in, followed by a flustered Harrison. Mr. Stark, your blood pressure, Phillips began, then stopped abruptly at the sight of Zora. His expression hardened. Nurse Jackson, what are you doing here? She's here because I asked for her, Howard said, his tone cooling noticeably. Phillips' smile was all teeth. Well, she's needed elsewhere now. We've just received your full cardiac workup, and I need to discuss some concerning findings. Zora recognized the deliberate exclusion, the professional slight. She began to step back, prepared to leave as expected. Actually, Howard said, his voice regaining some of its former command, I want Nurse Jackson present for this discussion. Phillips faltered. Sir, with all due respect, this is a complex medical. She saved my life when you stood there doing nothing. Howard cut him off. I think that earns her a place at the table. Wouldn't you say? The monitors began beeping more rapidly, warning of rising blood pressure. Zora moved instinctively toward the controls. Mr. Stark, you need to remain calm, she said firmly. Your heart can't handle this stress right now. Howard locked eyes with her, a strange intensity in his gaze. Tell me honestly, Nurse Jackson, how bad is it? In that moment, Zora faced a decision that went beyond professional protocol. The truth might agitate him further, but patronizing evasion would be both disrespectful and potentially dangerous. Your LAD artery is severely blocked, she said steadily. You need immediate surgery. Without it, you're at high risk for a fatal heart attack. Phillips made a sound of protest, but Howard silenced him with a glare. And my chances? He pressed. With Dr. Romanoff performing the procedure? Better than most. She's the best. Howard's expression changed, something calculating entering his eyes. Dr. Romanoff, the redhead? She's performing my surgery. Yes, she's our top cardiac surgeon. A thin smile spread across Howard's face as he looked from Zora to Phillips, then to Harrison. Interesting. Very interesting. The monitors beeped again, more urgently this time. Zora moved quickly, adjusting his medication. This conversation needs to end now, Mr. Stark. As she worked, Howard caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for a man in his condition. This isn't over, Nurse Jackson. Not by a long shot. His words carried an ambiguous promise that sent a chill down her spine. In his eyes, she saw something that frightened her more than his earlier contempt, a calculating interest, as if she'd become a puzzle he intended to solve. Whatever Howard Stark was planning, Zora knew with sudden certainty that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The morning after Howard Stark's collapse, Zora sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone in disbelief. The video playing on screen showed her kneeling over Howard's body, tearing open his shirt, barking orders at frozen staff members. Someone had captured the entire incident, from his collapse to the moment his pulse stabilized, and now it was everywhere. 3 million views overnight, whispered Zuri, still in her pajamas, watching over her mother's shoulder. People are calling you a hero. Zora closed the video, her hands trembling with rage rather than pride. I was doing my job. The same job Howard Stark said I wasn't qualified for because of my skin color. But Mom, don't you see? Everyone witnessed it. His racism, his collapse, you saving him anyway. It's all there. The realization hit Zora like a physical blow. Her humiliation hadn't just been witnessed by hospital staff. It was now public spectacle. Millions of strangers had watched Howard Stark degrade her, then depend on her for survival. The violation felt complete. I have to go, Zora said, pressing a quick kiss to Zuri's forehead. Don't read the comments, baby. Promise me. Zuri nodded, though they both knew it was a promise unlikely to be kept. The hospital parking lot was unusually crowded when Zora arrived. News vans lined the perimeter, reporters clutching coffee cups in the morning chill. She pulled her coat collar higher, hoping to slip in unnoticed through the staff entrance. Nurse Jackson. The deep voice stopped her mid-stride. James Rhodes stood beside a black SUV, his expression grave. Mr. Rhodes, I don't have time. Make time, he interrupted, his tone gentle but insistent. What I have to tell you can't wait. Something in his eyes, urgency mixed with genuine concern, made her hesitate. She glanced at the hospital entrance, where security had doubled overnight. 5 minutes, she conceded. Inside the vehicle, warmth and privacy enveloped them. James handed her a paper cup of coffee, prepared exactly as she liked it, though she couldn't remember telling him her preference. Phillips has been in emergency meetings since dawn, he said without preamble. He's building a case against you, claiming you violated protocols, overstepped your authority, endanger Howard's life. Cold rage settled in Zora's stomach. That's absurd. He was standing there doing nothing while Howard was dying. The video makes that clear to anyone with eyes, James agreed. But Phillips has powerful allies. The hospital board is split. Half want to commend you publicly to ride the wave of positive press. The other half, led by Phillips and Harrison, want to make an example of you. For what? Being competent while black. James's eyes met hers, holding steady. Essentially, yes. The bluntness of his answer, the absence of polite deflection, caught her off guard. Most white men in positions of power danced around such raw truths. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, studying his face for ulterior motives. "Because I recognize injustice when I see it." He hesitated, something personal flickering behind his professional demeanor. "My sister was a cardiac surgeon in Boston. Brilliant, dedicated. She reported a white colleague for consistently negligent treatment of minority patients. Within 6 months, they destroyed her career. Fabricated complaints, peer reviews questioning her judgment, malpractice insurance rates tripled. The admission shifted something between them. This wasn't just business for him. What happened to her? She's teaching nursing at a community college in Ohio now." Pain flashed across his features. She saved lives for 20 years, then became inconvenient to people with power. Zora absorbed this, recognizing the cost of his honesty. "I appreciate the warning, but I can't just disappear. I have patients who need me." "No one's asking you to disappear," James said, reaching into his jacket. He handed her a business card. Not his own, but a lawyer's. "Howard has retained counsel for you. The best medical malpractice defense attorney in the state." Zora stared at the card. "Howard Stark is providing me with a lawyer?" His exact words were, "Make sure she's protected from those vultures." James's mouth curved slightly. "He's changing, Zora." "What happened? What you did despite how he treated you." It broke something open in him. Before she could process this, her phone rang. Elena, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Where are you?" "Phillips is on the warpath. He's reassigned all your patients and locked you out of the electronic records system." Ice formed in Zora's veins. Without access to patient records, she was effectively barred from doing her job, regardless of whether she could enter the building. "I'm in the parking lot," she replied. "With James Rhodes." A pause. "Stark's man? Interesting. Listen, don't come in through the main staff entrance. They've got security waiting with paperwork, probably a gag order and forced leave documentation. Meet me at the service entrance by radiology in 10 minutes. As she ended the call, Zora found James watching her intently. "They've locked me out," she explained, anger building like a physical pressure in her chest. 20 years of nursing, perfect evaluations, and they've locked me out of patient records because I had the audacity to save the wrong life in the wrong way. Or the right life in the right way, depending on your perspective. James's hand covered hers briefly, the contact both startling and steadying. "Howard is asking for you. Specifically, he's refusing treatment from Phillips." The revelation hung between them, complex in its implications. "Why?" "He says he wants the nurse who wasn't afraid to tell him the truth." James's eyes held hers. The one who saved him despite having every reason not to. Movement near the hospital entrance caught Zora's attention. Harrison emerging with 2 security guards, scanning the parking lot. "Looking for her." "I need to get inside," she said, reaching for the door handle. "Elena's waiting." James stopped her with a gentle touch to her arm. "Be careful. Phillips is desperate." Howard's awakening to the discrimination in his hospital threatens everything Phillips has built. Men like that are most dangerous when cornered. The warning sent a chill through Zora. "I can handle Phillips. I believe you can." The simple affirmation carried surprising weight. "But you shouldn't have to handle him alone." Something shifted in the atmosphere between them, an acknowledgement of alliance that felt deeper than professional courtesy. For the first time since her mother's death, Zora sensed someone truly seeing her struggle and choosing to stand alongside her, not out of obligation, but conviction. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for the recognition passing between them. 10 minutes later, Zora slipped through the service entrance where Elena waited, tension radiating from her normally confident posture. Phillips called an emergency staff meeting, Elena whispered as they hurried through back corridors. "He's claiming the video violates patient privacy laws and that your actions during the incident departed from accepted protocols." That's ridiculous, Zora hissed. I saved Howard's life while Phillips stood paralyzed. Everyone knows that. But knowing and saying are different things in this hospital. Elena stopped at a junction, checking for security. Harrison has promised a full investigation into all aspects of the incident. The coded language was clear. They were building a case against Zora, not Phillips. Where are we going? Zora asked as they entered an unfamiliar wing. The VIP floor. Howard's been asking for you since he woke up. Elena's expression softened slightly. Whatever you said to him yesterday made an impression. He's refusing to see Phillips until he speaks with you again. As they approached Howard's private room, raised voices echoed from within. Harrison's professionally modulated tones contrasted with a woman's sharper, more authoritative cadence. Frankly, don't care about your protocols, William, the woman was saying. My father has requested specific personnel for his care. Your job is to provide it, not question it. Elena gave Zora a knowing look. Natasha Stark, Howard's daughter. She arrived from Geneva last night and has been terrorizing administration ever since. The door opened abruptly, revealing an elegant woman whose resemblance to Howard was evident in the set of her jaw and penetrating gaze. She assessed Zora in one swift glance. Nurse Jackson, I presume, she said. Thank God. Perhaps you can talk sense into him. Inside, Howard Stark sat propped against pillows, looking simultaneously diminished and dangerous. His complexion was ashen, but his eyes burned with an intensity that belied his physical weakness. Nurse Jackson, he acknowledged, his voice weaker, but his gaze steady. I was beginning to think they'd hidden you away. Harrison stepped forward, professional smile firmly in place. Mr. Stark, given the circumstances, Dr. Phillips recommends that. I don't give a damn what Phillips recommends. Howard cut him off. He had his chance to prove his competence yesterday, and failed spectacularly. Harrison's smile tightened. Sir, there are protocols, which apparently include standing by while I die on the floor. Howard's voice strengthened with anger. I want Nurse Jackson on my care team. Exclusively. The request hung in the air, loaded with implications. Zora felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Harrison's thinly veiled hostility, Natasha's calculating assessment, and most disconcertingly, Howard's intense focus. Mr. Stark, Zora began carefully, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm a cardiac nurse, not a private physician. My responsibilities extend to multiple patients. Not anymore, Harrison interjected smoothly. Your regular assignments have been temporarily reassigned during the review process. The words confirmed what Elena had already told her. They'd effectively removed her from regular duties while building their case against her. Howard's expression darkened. So you've sidelined the most competent nurse in your hospital because she made Phillips look incompetent by comparison? That's not, Harrison began. It's exactly what's happening, Natasha interrupted. Let's not insult each other's intelligence with corporate doublespeak. Zora found herself in an impossible position, caught between administrative retaliation and Howard Stark's unexpected advocacy. The man who had humiliated her was now demanding her exclusive attention, while the hospital was systematically isolating her from her regular responsibilities. If I may, she said, reclaiming control of the conversation, Mr. Stark requires a full cardiac care team, not just a single nurse, regardless of qualifications. I'm happy to be part of that team, but I want you in charge of it, Howard interrupted, his gaze unwavering. I want someone who wasn't afraid to tell me I was dying to my face. Someone who acted when everyone else froze. The room fell silent. Harrison's expression suggested he'd bitten into something sour. That would be highly irregular, he finally managed. So it was allowing your star physician to stand paralyzed while your donor collapsed, Natasha countered. Seems like irregular is the new normal around here. A knock at the door preceded James Rhodes' entrance. His eyes found Zora's immediately, a silent question in them that she answered with a slight nod. The board is assembling, he informed the room at large. They're requesting statements from all involved parties regarding yesterday's incident. Harrison's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. A routine medical event is being blown completely out of proportion. A routine medical event? Howard's voice rose dangerously. "I nearly died in your lobby while your chief physician stood watching." Only Nurse Jackson had the competence and courage to act. The cardiac monitors began beeping in warning as Howard's blood pressure spiked. Zora moved automatically, adjusting his medication and checking his vitals. "Everyone needs to leave," she said firmly. "Mr. Stark's condition doesn't allow for this level of agitation." No one moved until she fixed them with the same authoritative stare she'd used during the emergency. One by one, they filed out, Harrison barely concealing his fury, Natasha with a satisfied smirk, James with a lingering glance that carried unspoken support. Alone with Howard, Zora worked silently, adjusting his fore and checking the monitors. When she finished, she found him watching her with unsettling intensity. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "You were dying. I'm a nurse. After what I said to you." His voice had lost its commanding edge, revealing something raw underneath. "Most people would have hesitated just for a second. You didn't." Zora met his gaze directly. "Most people haven't spent their entire careers proving they deserve to be in rooms where others think they don't belong." Howard absorbed this, something shifting in his expression. "I've been that person, the one who decided who belonged and who didn't." He gestured weakly at the monitors surrounding him. "Didn't save me when it mattered, did it?" Before she could respond, the door opened again. Dr. Phillips entered, his professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Stark, I must insist on examining you. Your vitals show concerning fluctuations, which Nurse Jackson has already addressed," Howard replied coldly. Phillips turned to Zora, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Thank you for covering, but I'll take over now." The dismissal was deliberate, designed to remind her of her place. But something had changed, in Howard, in the dynamics of the room, and in Zora herself. "Actually," she said, standing her ground, "Mr. Stark's medication has just been adjusted. I'd recommend waiting 30 minutes before any further examination to allow his system to stabilize." Philip's expression hardened. "That wasn't a request, Nurse Jackson. You're dismissed." "She stays," Howard said quietly. "You go." The tension in the room crystallized, the power dynamics shifting visibly. Phillips looked from Howard to Zora, calculation replacing confidence in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said softly, directing the words at Zora, though his smile remained fixed on Howard. "Not by a long shot." As he left, Zora felt the weight of his threat settle on her shoulders. Phillips would never forgive her, not for saving Howard's life, but for witnessing his failure and rising above her assigned place in the hospital hierarchy. "He'll try to destroy you," Howard observed, his voice matter of fact. Zora checked his foreline, her movements deliberate. "He can try." Howard's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Not the cruel expression from yesterday, but something almost like respect. "You know, Nurse Jackson, I've spent 50 years believing I could identify exceptional people on sight." He gestured weakly at himself. "Clearly, I've been wrong about more things than I realized." In that moment, Zora understood that whatever battle was coming, it would reach far beyond a single incident in a hospital lobby. The video had exposed not just Howard Stark's collapse, but the systemic failures that had allowed Phillips to maintain his position despite his prejudices. What neither Phillips nor Harrison realized yet was that Zora Jackson had spent her entire career preparing for this fight, not just for herself, but for every patient who had ever received substandard care, because someone decided they mattered less. And now, improbably, she had Howard Stark as an ally. "Rest, Mr. Stark," she said, adjusting his pillows. "You'll need your strength." So would she. The real battle was just beginning. The surgical theater hummed with tension as Dr. Elena Romanoff worked methodically to save Howard Stark's life. Zora stood at her assigned position, monitoring vitals and passing instruments with practiced efficiency. The gallery above was empty, a concession of privacy that Howard's legal team had demanded, but Zora felt watched nonetheless. "Pressure is dropping," she announced, eyes on the monitors. Heart rate elevated. Elena nodded without looking up, her focus absolute as she navigated the delicate bypass procedure. "Push 5 milligrams of." "Already done," Zora replied, one step ahead. The surgery had been progressing smoothly until 10 minutes ago, when Elena had discovered the damage was more extensive than the imaging had shown. What should have been a straightforward bypass had become something far more complex and dangerous. "I don't like this," Elena murmured, her voice low enough that only Zora could hear. "The damage pattern is unusual." Almost like she didn't finish the thought, but Zora understood. The scarring on Howard's heart muscle suggested a long-term issue, not a sudden event. This wasn't his first cardiac episode, just the first one he hadn't concealed. The door to the surgical suite opened, and Dr. Phillips entered, already gowned and masked. "Dr. Romanoff, I've been asked to assist." Elena didn't look up. "By whom?" "The board," Phillips replied smoothly. "Given Mr. Stark's importance." "We're in the middle of a delicate procedure," Elena cut him off. "Either scrub in silently or leave." Phillips' eyes narrowed above his mask as he took position opposite Elena. His gaze flicked to Zora, cold with barely concealed contempt. For the next hour, they worked in tense silence, the only sounds the beeping monitors and Elena's occasional requests for instruments. Zora felt Phillips watching her every move, waiting for a mistake that never came. "Something's not right," Elena said suddenly, her voice tight. "His pressure shouldn't be dropping like this." Zora checked the monitors, alarm spreading through her chest. Howard's blood pressure was plummeting despite no obvious surgical cause. "Could be a reaction to the anesthesia," Phillips suggested, his tone almost casual. "After 2 hours?" Elena countered. "Not likely." Zora moved quickly to the medication tray, reviewing what had been administered. Everything appeared correct, yet Howard's vitals continued to deteriorate. "We need to finish now," Elena ordered, her hands moving with increased urgency. "Nurse Jackson, prepare for emergency closure." As Zora turned to gather the necessary supplies, she noticed something, a nearly imperceptible difference in the color of the solution in one of the 4 bags. Years of nursing experience flashed warning signals in her mind. "Dr. Romanoff," she said quietly, "I need to change this 4 solution." Philip's head snapped up. "That solution is fine. I checked it myself." Zora met his gaze steadily. "With respect, doctor, it's not standard protocol for cardiac bypass." Elena glanced up briefly. "Change it, Jackson." The tension in the room thickened as Zora swiftly replaced the 4 bag. Within minutes, Howard's vitals began to stabilize, his blood pressure slowly rising back to safer levels. Elena's eyes met Zora's above her mask, a silent question passing between them. Zora gave an almost imperceptible nod toward Phillips, who was now focused intently on the surgical field, his posture rigid. The remainder of the surgery proceeded without incident, but the unspoken suspicion lingered like a shadow. When they finally closed, Howard's heart beating steadily on its own, Elena nodded to Zora. "Excellent work, as always," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Stark is fortunate to have you on his team." In the scrub room afterward, Elena waited until they were alone before speaking. "That 4 solution," she began, "was diluted," Zora confirmed quietly. "Not enough to kill him, but enough to cause complications that would appear natural." Elena's expression hardened. "You're certain?" 20 years of nursing," Zora replied. "I know what standard solutions look like, feel like." "That wasn't right." "Phillips," Elena whispered, naming the suspicion that hung between them. "We can't prove anything," Zora cautioned. "It could have been a pharmacy error." "You don't believe that any more than I do." Elena stripped off her surgical cap, her hands shaking slightly with suppressed anger. "This isn't the first time I've noticed irregularities during his procedures, but it's the first time I've had someone else see it too." Before Zora could respond, the door opened. James Rhodes entered, his expression grave. "Stark's in recovery," Elena informed him. "Stable condition." James nodded, but his attention was fixed on Zora. "Nurse Jackson, may I speak with you privately?" Something in his tone sent a chill down Zora's spine. She followed him to a small consultation room, where he closed the door and drew the blinds. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room," he began, his voice low and urgent. "Howard asked me to investigate this hospital 6 months ago after patterns emerged in patient outcomes." Zora stared at him. "What kind of patterns?" "Racial disparities. Black and brown patients experiencing significantly higher complication rates, longer recovery times, and poorer outcomes, but only under certain doctors' care." The word struck Zora like physical blows. "Phillips," she whispered. James nodded. "Among others. Howard suspected systemic problems, but we needed evidence." He hesitated. "When I was reviewing records, I found a case from 5 years ago. A woman named Delilah Jackson." The floor seemed to drop from beneath Zora's feet. "My mother. She died of post-operative complications after what should have been a routine procedure," James continued gently. "Phillips was her surgeon." Memories crashed through Zora. Her mother's rapid decline, the dismissive explanations, the nagging sense that something wasn't right. She'd been a new nurse then, still trusting the system, accepting the doctor's authority without question. "That's why I became a cardiac specialist," she said, her voice hollow. "She died of heart failure after her surgery. They said it was an unforeseen complication." James's expression softened with compassion. "It's why Howard insisted you be on his surgical team today. He wanted someone who would notice if anything wasn't right." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. He used himself as bait, she realized. He knew his own surgery would be too high profile for anyone to ignore. Too many people watching. Except Phillips couldn't resist the opportunity, James confirmed. Not with Howard Stark on the table. The door opened suddenly, revealing Natasha Stark. "He's awake," she announced, "and asking for both of you." In recovery, Howard Stark looked pale but alert, his eyes sharp despite the lingering effects of anesthesia. When he saw Zora, something like satisfaction crossed his features. "You saw it," he stated, not a question. Zora nodded. "The for solution was diluted. We suspected Phillips was targeting specific patients," Howard explained, his voice rough from the breathing tube. "Patients he considered less valuable." "Like my mother," Zora said quietly. Howard's expression shifted to something unexpectedly gentle. "Yes, I'm sorry about your mother, Nurse Jackson. That failure is partly mine." Zora stared at him. "How could it possibly be your fault?" "Because I've funded this hospital for 15 years without asking the right questions," he replied. "I looked at buildings and equipment and prestige. I never looked at who was dying and who was living. Not until Natasha forced me to see it." Natasha stepped forward. "Phillips isn't acting alone. There's a network of administrators and doctors who've been manipulating patient care based on race, income, and social standing. We have enough evidence now to expose them, thanks to what happened in surgery today. But we need your testimony," Howard added, watching Zora intently. "Which means putting yourself at risk. These people will fight back. They'll try to discredit you, destroy your career." The weight of their words settled on Zora's shoulders like a physical burden. She thought of her mother, of Zuri's dreams of becoming a doctor, of all the patients who had died because someone decided their lives mattered less. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she finally asked. Howard Stark's gaze was steady, his voice stronger now. "Help me tear this whole corrupt system down and rebuild it. Starting tomorrow." 3 days after Howard Stark's surgery, Zora arrived at Manhattan Memorial to find her hospital badge deactivated. Security guards, men she'd greeted every morning for 5 years, avoided her eyes as they explained she couldn't enter the building. "On whose authority?" she demanded, acutely aware of the stares from passing staff. "Administrative leave, pending investigation," the senior guard mumbled, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. "You're to have no contact with patients until further notice." The official letter inside bore Harrison's signature, citing serious concerns regarding professional conduct and unauthorized medication changes during a high-risk procedure. Zora's hands trembled with fury. They were moving faster than Howard had predicted, attempting to discredit her before she could speak out. Outside, rain fell in sheets, matching her darkening mood. She was fumbling for her car keys when Elena called. "They've suspended my surgical privileges," her friend said without preamble, voice tight with anger. Phillips is claiming I allowed an unqualified nurse to make critical decisions during Stark's surgery. They're panicking, Zora replied, rain soaking through her jacket. Howard expected this. Expected, maybe, but prepared for? I'm not so sure. Elena's voice dropped. They're pulling all my cases for review. 20 years of work, Zora. My entire career. The weight of guilt pressed down on Zora's shoulders. Elena's career was collateral damage in a battle she'd never asked to fight. I'm sorry, Zora whispered. Don't be, Elena replied fiercely. This was always going to happen. The question is whether we go down alone or take them with us. When Zora arrived home, she found James Rhodes waiting in a nondescript car outside her modest apartment building. You've been suspended, he said as she slid into the passenger seat, water dripping from her clothes. News travels fast. Phillips moved more quickly than we anticipated, James admitted. He has powerful friends on the hospital board. They're constructing a narrative that you endanger Howard's life rather than saved it. And Howard, recovering well, but the board is restricting visitor access. They're claiming it's for his protection. James's expression hardened. We've lost our direct line to him. Zora stared through the rain-streaked windshield. So what now? We proceed with the evidence we have. Medical records showing the pattern of disparate outcomes. Financial documents revealing kickbacks. Testimony from staff who've witnessed discrimination but were afraid to speak up. That won't be enough, Zora said quietly. Not against people with the connections and resources Phillips has. James turned to face her, his eyes intense. Which is why we need your mother's medical records. And your testimony about what you saw in that operating room. Zora closed her eyes, the magnitude of what they were asking finally hitting her. If I do this, I'll never work as a nurse in this city again. They'll make sure of it. Probably, James acknowledged, his honesty oddly comforting. Her phone buzzed, a text from Zuri. Mom, why are people saying things about you online? Some girl at school showed me a post. Fresh panic gripped Zora's heart. They were coming after her publicly, and now her daughter was caught in the crossfire. I need to go, she told James abruptly. Zuri's being affected by this. James nodded. I'll contact you tonight with the next steps. At home, Zora found Zuri hunched over a laptop, eyes red-rimmed. The screen displayed a hospital gossip forum where someone had posted accusations that Nurse Jackson had endangered a VIP patient by countermanding a doctor's orders. Is this about that billionaire? Zuri asked, voice small and confused. Mom, what's happening? Zora sat beside her daughter, struggling to find words that wouldn't terrify her. How could she explain the ugliness of what they were facing without destroying Zuri's idealism about medicine? I witnessed something wrong at the hospital, she began carefully. Something dangerous. And now, the people responsible are trying to protect themselves by discrediting me. Zuri's eyes widened. Like whistleblower retaliation, we studied that in government class. Zora managed a weak smile at her brilliant daughter. Something like that. Then you have to fight back, Zuri insisted with the absolute certainty of youth. You always tell me to stand up for what's right. It's not that simple, baby. These people have power, money, connections. So what is that Stark guy you saved, right? Zuri countered. Mom, you can't let them win. Before Zora could respond, her phone rang. An unknown number. Nurse Jackson, came a voice she recognized as Dr. Phillips. I think it's time we talked. Ice formed in Zora's veins. I have nothing to say to you. Don't be hasty. I'm offering you a way out of this mess. His tone was smooth, reasonable. A letter of resignation, citing personal reasons, excellent references for positions outside New York, and a generous severance package. In exchange for my silence, Zora finished. In exchange for acknowledging that stress and personal bias may have colored your perception of events in the operating room, he corrected. Everyone makes mistakes, Nurse Jackson. Your mother's case was unfortunate, but dragging it into this situation won't bring her back. The casual mention of her mother sent rage pulsing through Zora. How dare you? Consider your daughter's future, Phillips continued, his voice hardening. Zuri, isn't it? Brilliant girl. Pre-med ambitions. It would be a shame if this scandal affected her college applications. The threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable, stole Zora's breath. "You stay away from my daughter." "That's entirely up to you," Phillips replied. "You have until tomorrow to decide. After that, the hospital will proceed with formal charges of negligence and endangerment." The line went dead, leaving Zora trembling. Zuri stared at her, fear replacing the earlier certainty in her young face. "Mom, it's okay," Zora lied, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug. "Everything's going to be okay." That night, after Zuri had finally fallen asleep, Zora's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Natasha Stark standing in the hallway, her designer clothes incongruous against the building's worn carpet. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Inside, Natasha declined Zora's offer of tea, getting straight to the point. "Phillips approached you." "How did you know?" "Because he approached Elena too, and Michael Keaton, and 3 other staff members who might corroborate your account." Natasha's expression was grim. "He's systematically neutralizing everyone who could support your version of events." Zora sank onto her couch. "He threatened Zuri's future." "I'm not surprised. These people fight dirty when cornered." Natasha hesitated. "There's more. My father had another cardiac episode an hour ago." Fear clutched at Zora's heart. "Is he stable for now?" "But they're restricting his visitors to family only, and they've brought in a cardiac specialist from Johns Hopkins who happens to be Philip's former classmate." Natasha's meaning was clear. "I can't prove they're deliberately compromising his care, but they wouldn't risk killing Howard Stark," Zora protested. "The scrutiny would be too intense. Unless it appeared to be natural complications following surgery," Natasha countered. A tragic but not unexpected outcome for a man of his age with severe cardiac disease. The room seemed to tilt beneath Zora. They were up against people willing to let a man die to protect their power and reputation. People who had possibly done the same to her mother and countless others. "What about the evidence? The records you've collected?" Natasha's expression tightened. "The hospital's internal server had an unfortunate malfunction last night. Many records are now corrupted or missing." "That's not possible," Zora whispered. "Those records are backed up multiple times by systems controlled by the hospital's IT department, which reports to Harrison." Natasha's eyes flashed with barely controlled anger. "They're covering their tracks, Zora, and they're doing it very effectively." The full weight of their situation crashed down on Zora. Without those records, without access to Howard, without her position at the hospital, they had almost nothing. Just her word against an entire system designed to protect itself. "So we've lost," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Not yet." Natasha leaned forward. "There's one option left, but it's risky. For all of us." "What option?" "Going public. Tomorrow. A press conference with you, me, and James. We lay out everything we know and appeal directly to other hospital staff to come forward." Zora stared at her. "That's suicide. Professionally, legally, they'll destroy us." "Probably," Natasha admitted. "But it might create enough pressure to protect my father and force an external investigation." The choice before Zora crystallized with terrible clarity. Accept Philip's offer and protect herself and Zuri, or risk everything on a desperate gambit that might fail spectacularly. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Phillips got to Michael. "He's recanting his support. We're running out of allies." Zora closed her eyes, overwhelmed. The system she'd dedicated her life to was closing ranks against her. Friends were abandoning her. Her daughter's future was being threatened. And somewhere in that hospital, Howard Stark lay vulnerable to the same people who may have killed her mother. "I need time to think," she told Natasha. "This isn't just my life I'm risking." After Natasha left, Zora sat in the darkness of her apartment, paralyzed by the impossible choice before her. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt utterly alone, a single woman standing against forces too powerful to fight. Her phone buzzed again. Not James or Elena this time, but Dr. Phillips, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Come alone to sign the paperwork. This offer expires then. Zora stared at the message, tears blurring her vision as the walls seemed to close in around her. Dawn found Zora sitting on her small balcony, watching the city awaken as she turned her hospital badge over in her hands. 5 years at Manhattan Memorial, 18 years in nursing. A career built on compassion, excellence, and the promise she'd made at her mother's bedside. "I'll make it better," she had whispered to Delilah Jackson as machines kept her failing heart beating. "I'll make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Now, with Philip's ultimatum hanging over her, that promise felt like a weight pulling her under. The soft sound of Zuri's footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Her daughter appeared in sleep-rumpled pajamas, eyes clear and determined in a way that reminded Zora painfully of her mother. "I found something," Zuri said without preamble, placing a battered shoebox on the small table between them. Zora recognized it instantly, her mother's personal effects, carefully preserved after her death. "Zuri, what are you doing with this?" "Looking for answers." Zuri lifted the lid, revealing neatly organized papers. "Grandma kept everything, Mom, including this." She handed Zora a small notebook, its pages filled with Delilah's precise handwriting. "It's her medical journal. She documented everything, symptoms, medications, how different doctors treated her, even conversations she overheard." Zora's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Her mother had been a meticulous woman, a former school administrator who approached her illness with the same organizational rigor she'd applied to everything in life. "There," Zuri pointed to an entry dated 3 days before the surgery that would claim Delilah's life. Dr. Phillips argued with nurse in hallway. Said these patients taking up beds meant for people who matter. Nurse looked upset, walked away. When he saw me, smiled like nothing happened. Different face for different people. Zora's breath caught. The next entries detailed similar incidents. Phillips discussing managing expectations for certain demographics, with Harrison, nurses being reprimanded for wasting resources on extended care for elderly Black patients, medication dosages being adjusted without explanation. "Grandma knew something was wrong," Zuri said softly. She just didn't know how deep it went. The final entry, written the night before surgery, sent a chill through Zora. "Overheard Phillips tell resident that my case low priority but good practice. Said not to waste expensive antibiotics, post-op unless absolutely necessary. Afraid to say anything, might make treatment worse. Telling Zora would only worry her. Praying it goes well anyway." Grief and rage rose in Zora's throat. Her mother had sensed the danger, but stayed silent to protect her, just as Zora now contemplated silence to protect Zuri. The cycle had to end. "I can't let them keep doing this," she whispered, closing the journal. Zuri's eyes shone with fierce pride. "Then don't." Before Zora could respond, her phone rang. James Rhodes. "Don't go to the hospital," he said without greeting. "Phillips has security waiting to escort you out if you show up." "I wasn't planning to sign his papers anyway," Zora replied, a new resolve hardening her voice. "We found evidence, James. My mother's journal documenting Phillips' behavior before her surgery." A beat of silence. "That's something, but it's not enough, I know. But it's a start." Zora straightened her spine. "Natasha mentioned a press conference. Is that still possible?" "Possible, but dangerous," James cautioned, "without Howard's direct backing." "Then we need to reach Howard," Zora interrupted. "You said family visits are still allowed?" "Yes, but then we use family." An idea was forming, desperate but possible. "James, I need you to get Zuri to school. Then meet me at Elena's apartment in an hour." She ended the call and turned to her daughter, who watched her with worried eyes. "Mom, what are you planning?" Zora managed a smile. "Something your grandmother would approve of." 2 hours later, Zora sat in Elena's living room with a small group of allies. Elena, James, and now Maria Stark, elegant even in casual clothes, her eyes sharp with strategic intelligence. "It's a solid plan," Maria acknowledged after Zora outlined her strategy. "Risky, but the only path forward I see." James leaned forward, concern etching his features. "If you're caught, I'll be arrested for trespassing at minimum," Zora finished. "I know. And if it works?" Elena asked, her surgical precision evident even in conversation. "Then we have a chance," Zora replied. "A small one, but better than surrender." Maria Stark studied Zora with newfound respect. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago. facing down a boardroom of men who thought my only value was as Howard's wife. She reached for her purse, extracting a small flash drive. This contains backup copies of all the hospital data Natasha managed to secure before the server malfunction. Financial records, patient outcomes, staffing decisions, everything. Zora stared at the tiny device. How did you? I've been married to Howard Stark for 40 years, Maria replied with a thin smile. I learned long ago to keep my own copies of important information. James took the flash drive, tucking it securely into his pocket. This changes the equation. With this and your mother's journal. We still need Howard, Zora insisted. His voice, his authority. Without him, they'll paint this as disgruntled employees with a vendetta. Elena checked her watch. We need to move. Phillips called an emergency staff meeting for noon. Something about addressing recent incidents of protocol violation. He's consolidating control, Maria observed. Ensuring the staff understands the consequences of speaking out. Zora stood, resolve strengthening her spine. Then let's make sure they hear another side of the story. As they prepared to leave, James touched Zora's arm, drawing her aside. I need to say something, he began, his voice low. If this goes wrong. It might, she acknowledged. I haven't known you long, he continued, but I've seen enough to recognize someone extraordinary. His eyes held hers, emotions barely contained beneath his composed surface. Whatever happens today, I'm with you. Not just for Howard or for justice in the abstract. For you. The simple declaration, honest, direct, without artifice, caught Zora off guard. In the midst of crisis, this unexpected connection felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. I don't know what to say, she admitted. James smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. You don't need to say anything. Just know you're not alone in this fight. For the first time in days, Zora felt the weight on her shoulders lighten fractionally. Not alone. The words echoed as she squared her shoulders and nodded to the others. Let's go change some lives, she said, leading them out into the uncertain daylight. Manhattan Memorial Hospital bustled with its usual midday activity as Maria Stark swept through the main entrance, commanding attention without effort. Security guards straightened, administrators nodded deferentially, and patients watched with curious eyes as Howard Stark's wife moved purposefully toward the elevators. No one questioned the elegantly dressed woman trailing 2 steps behind her, Zora Jackson, nearly unrecognizable in an expensive suit borrowed from Maria's closet, her hair styled differently, carrying a leather portfolio like countless hospital administrators. Mrs. Stark, the guard at the VIP floor, greeted, barely glancing at Zora. Here, to see Mr. Stark? Obviously, Maria replied with just enough aristocratic dismissiveness to discourage further questions. Once inside Howard's private room, Zora's professional instincts took over. She scanned his monitors, noting improved vitals since she'd last seen him, but also subtle signs of overmedication. They're keeping him sedated, she murmured, adjusting his flow rate. Howard's eyes fluttered open as the sedatives began to clear from his system. Recognition dawned slowly, then sharpened into alertness. Nurse Jackson, he rasped. Bold move. Necessary move, she countered, helping him sit up. They're systematically destroying evidence and silencing witnesses. We need your voice. As Howard's mind cleared, Maria quickly briefed him on Phillips' ultimatum, the corrupted records, and their desperate plan. His expression hardened with each revelation. How long until Phillips' staff meeting? He asked. 20 minutes, Zora replied. Howard reached for the call button. Give me Dr. Phillips immediately. Howard, Maria cautioned, perhaps we should. Trust me, he interrupted, a familiar gleam returning to his eyes. I didn't build Stark Industries by playing defense. When Phillips arrived minutes later, he froze at the sight of Zora, standing confidently beside Howard's bed. Mr. Stark, this woman isn't authorized to be here, he began, reaching for his pager. I authorized her. Howard cut in, his voice regaining its commanding edge. Close the door, Phillips. It's time we had an honest conversation. Outside the hospital, James Rhodes and Natasha Stark stood before a hastily assembled group of journalists. The press had responded eagerly to the cryptic invitation from Stark Industries regarding systematic issues at Manhattan Memorial Hospital. "We'll proceed whether we hear from Zora or not," Natasha murmured to James. "But without my father's direct testimony." James checked his phone for the 20th time. "Have faith in her." In the hospital auditorium, staff gathered for Philip's emergency meeting. Elena slipped in quietly, positioning herself near the back exit. Harrison stood at the podium, reviewing notes with forced casualness while casting nervous glances at the empty seats reserved for board members. As Philip's assistant announced the start of the meeting, the auditorium doors burst open. Howard Stark entered, moving with surprising vigor for a man 4 days post-cardiac surgery. Beside him walked Zora Jackson, her spine straight, her expression calm despite the gasps and whispers erupting around them. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison sputtered as Howard took command of the podium. "The meaning is truth, William," Howard replied, his voice carrying effortlessly through the stunned silence. "Something in short supply around here lately." Security guards hesitated at the doors, unsure whether to intervene when the hospital's primary benefactor was speaking. Philip's face had drained of color, his eyes darting between Howard and the exits. "Staff of Manhattan Memorial," Howard began, "my name is on the building you work in, but until recently I had no idea what was happening inside it. I believed I was funding excellence without bias. I was wrong." He gestured to Zora. "3 days ago, this woman saved my life, not once but twice. First, when I collapsed after shamefully disrespecting her. Then again in surgery, when she identified a deliberately compromised medication that would have caused natural complications resulting in my death." The auditorium erupted in shocked murmurs. Phillips stepped forward, his professional mask firmly in place. "Mr. Stark, these are serious accusations based on nothing but the word of a nurse currently under investigation for protocol violations." "I have more than her word," Howard interrupted, nodding to James and Natasha, who entered through the side door. "I have data." James connected a laptop to the auditorium's projection system, and suddenly the screen filled with statistics, graphs, and financial records. Patient outcomes sorted by race and income. Mortality rates under specific doctors. Financial transfers between hospital accounts and private consulting firms. "These records show a clear pattern," Natasha explained, her voice calm and methodical as she walked the stunned audience through the evidence. "Certain doctors, including Dr. Phillips, show significantly worse outcomes for minority patients. Simultaneously, these same doctors received substantial payments through consulting arrangements approved by Administrator Harrison." The room had gone deathly quiet. Zora stepped forward, opening her mother's journal. "This systematic discrimination isn't abstract. It has names and faces." Her voice, steady despite the emotion, threatening to overwhelm her. "My mother, Delilah Jackson, documented her concerns before her surgery 5 years ago. Surgery performed by Dr. Phillips, who was overheard saying her case was low priority and instructing residents to minimize post-operative care." Phillips' professional composure finally cracked. "You can't possibly believe the scribblings of a dying woman over the word of a board-certified surgeon with 30 years of experience." "Actually," came a new voice from the back of the room, "we can." An elderly black man in a security uniform stood up, his badge identifying him as Samuel Washington, head of security. "I've worked at this hospital for 42 years, he continued, his deep voice commanding attention. "Seen administrators come and go. Watched how things change and how they don't. I've kept my own records of who lives and who dies in this place." He walked slowly to the front, placing a worn notebook beside Delilah's journal. "Every patient who died under suspicious circumstances. Every staff complaint buried. Every security footage mysteriously erased. Names, dates, witnesses." Harrison lunged for the podium. "This is preposterous. The board will never." "The board is already aware," interrupted Maria Stark, entering with 3 stern-faced individuals. "In fact, they called an emergency session this morning after receiving copies of all this evidence. These representatives have some questions for you, William." And for Dr. Phillips. Phillips' composure shattered completely. This is a coordinated attack. A conspiracy to what? Zora asked quietly. To ensure every patient receives equal care? To hold medical professionals accountable when they violate their oath? To prevent more mothers from dying because someone decided their lives mattered less? Her words hung in the air as staff members began to stand. First Elena, then Michael Keaton, who had slipped in unnoticed, then nurses, technicians, orderlies, forming a visual testament to the truth of her words. Howard moved to stand beside Zora, addressing the room with renewed authority. Effective immediately, I am establishing an independent oversight committee with full authority to review every aspect of this hospital's operations. Any staff member who has witnessed discrimination or suspicious outcomes will be given full whistleblower protection. His eyes found Phillips, who had backed against the wall. Those found responsible will face not just termination, but criminal charges where appropriate. Manhattan Memorial will become a model of equity in healthcare, or will cease to bear my name and receive my support. As security escorted a protesting Phillips and Harrison from the auditorium, the atmosphere transformed, tension giving way to cautious relief, then to something more powerful, hope. James made his way to Zora through the crowd of staff, now speaking openly, sharing long-suppressed concerns and observations. You did it, he said softly, his eyes filled with admiration. We did it, she corrected, suddenly aware of the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her now that adrenaline was fading. But this is just the beginning. Howard approached them, leaning slightly on Maria's arm. Nurse Jackson, he began, then corrected himself. Zora, that position I mentioned earlier? It's yours if you want it. What position? She asked warily. Director of Patient Advocacy and Equity, Howard replied. With authority to implement systemic changes throughout this hospital and eventually across our entire healthcare network. Zora stared at him, speechless at the scope of what he was offering. A position with real power to create the change she'd fought for, to fulfill the promise made at her mother's bedside. I'd need a team, she finally said, mind already racing with possibilities. Howard smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. I thought you might say that, which is why Dr. Romanoff has already been offered chief of cardiac surgery with a mandate to rebuild the department according to equity center principles. Elena appeared at Zora's side, grinning broadly. Say yes, Jackson. I need someone keeping these surgeons honest. As the implications settled over her, Zora felt James's hand find hers, a silent promise of support. Beyond the auditorium doors, she could see reporters gathering, hungry for the story unfolding within. There will be resistance, she cautioned. Change this fundamental doesn't come easily, especially when it challenges power. Which is precisely why we need someone who doesn't back down, Howard replied. Someone who saved my life despite my arrogance. Someone who risked everything to protect patients she'd never even met. In that moment, surrounded by allies both new and old, Zora thought of her mother's strength, her daughter's determination, and her own journey from that terrible day 5 years ago to this unexpected turning point. Yes, she said simply, the word carrying the weight of both endings and beginnings. I accept. The applause that followed felt like more than approval. It felt like the first notes of a long overdue reckoning, the sound of a system beginning to heal from within. 6 months later, Zora Jackson stood at the podium in the newly renamed Delilah Jackson Memorial Wing. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the diverse crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony. Hospital staff, community members, and media representatives eager to document Manhattan Memorial's transformation. Healthcare isn't just about medicine, Zora began, her voice steady and confident in a way that still occasionally surprised her. It's about seeing each patient as equally deserving of our best efforts, regardless of their skin color, bank account, or address. It's about recognizing that excellence and equity aren't competing values. They're inseparable. In the front row, Howard and Maria Stark listened with quiet pride. Howard's health had improved dramatically under Elena's care. though Zora suspected his newfound dedication to cardiac rehabilitation had more to do with his determination to see their reforms through than any concern for his own well-being. Beside the Starks sat Zuri, beaming with undisguised pride. At 17, she'd become something of a celebrity among her classmates after the story broke nationally. The daughter whose mother had taken on the medical establishment and won. More importantly, her early acceptance letters had begun arriving from top pre-med programs, each eager to recruit the young woman whose personal essay on healthcare justice had caught the attention of admissions committees nationwide. 6 months ago, this hospital stood at a crossroads, Zora continued. Today, I'm proud to share that our patient outcome disparities have decreased by 43%. Our new community advisory board ensures that policies reflect the needs of all patients. And our whistleblower protection program has created a culture where staff at every level feel empowered to advocate for ethical care. What Zora didn't mention was the cost of these changes. The legal proceedings against Phillips, Harrison, and 6 other former staff members had consumed countless hours and resources. Several board members had resigned rather than face scrutiny. Some veteran doctors had departed, uncomfortable with the new accountability measures. Yet for every departure, 3 new applications arrived. Healthcare professionals drawn to what was becoming known nationally as the Manhattan Memorial Model. Young doctors and nurses specifically sought positions at what healthcare journals were calling the most progressive hospital transformation in modern medical history. None of this would have been possible, Zora acknowledged, without the courage of many individuals who risked their careers and reputations to stand for what's right. People like Dr. Elena Romanoff, Michael Keaton, Samuel Washington, and dozens of others who chose the harder path of truth over the easier road of silence. Elena, now chief of cardiac surgery, nodded from her seat beside Michael, who had been appointed head of nursing education. Samuel Washington sat proudly in his security uniform, recently promoted to director of hospital security and compliance. I also want to recognize the Stark family, Zora continued, meeting Howard's eyes, not just for their financial support, but for their moral courage. When confronted with uncomfortable truths about an institution bearing their name, they didn't defend the status quo or look away. They demanded better, not just with words, but with actions. Howard's expression softened, a remarkable transformation from the arrogant man who had humiliated her in that corridor half a year ago. His journey from contempt to respect had become part of the hospital's lore. The billionaire whose life was saved by the very excellence he'd failed to recognize. Finally, Zora said, her voice growing more personal, I want to honor my mother, Delilah Jackson, a woman who documented injustice even as she suffered from it, who taught me that excellence is its own form of resistance. This wing bears her name not just because of how she died, but because of how she lived with dignity, intelligence, and an unwavering belief that things could be better. As applause filled the atrium, Zora caught James Rhodes' eye in the second row. His steady gaze held the quiet understanding that had developed between them through countless late nights planning strategy, confronting opposition, and gradually, cautiously, exploring the connection that had sparked in the midst of crisis. After the ceremony, as staff and guests mingled over refreshments, James found Zora near the new memorial plaque bearing Delilah's image and a quote from her journal. Different face for different people is no way to heal. She would be proud, James said softly, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. I hope so, Zora replied, tracing her mother's name with gentle fingers. Sometimes I wonder if she'd recognize me now. Director Jackson with an office and a team. She'd recognize your heart, James said with certainty. That hasn't changed. Zora turned to face him, smiling at the man who had become her closest ally, and, increasingly, something more. Their relationship had developed slowly, both of them conscious of the intense circumstances of their meeting and the importance of building something genuine beyond the crisis that had brought them together. You're good from my perspective, James Rhodes. Someone needs to be, he replied with the wry humor she'd come to cherish. Especially now that you've got Howard Stark calling you for advice 3 times a week. Before she could respond, Zuri appeared, practically vibrating with excitement as she clutched an envelope. "Mom, Columbia just sent their acceptance package." Zora pulled her daughter into a fierce hug, emotion swelling in her chest. "I told you they'd be crazy not to take you." "With a full scholarship," Zuri added, eyes shining. "The Maria Stark Foundation Fellowship for Future Medical Leaders." Maria approached, elegant as always in a simple designer suit. "I hope you don't mind," she said to Zora. The foundation wanted to recognize exceptional young women committed to medical ethics. "I don't know how to thank you," Zora began, but Maria waved away her words. "Thank me by continuing what you've started here," she replied. "Howard and I haven't seen this kind of purpose in his eyes in decades. This hospital was always a tax write-off for him before. Now it's a legacy he actually cares about." Across the room, Howard was deep in conversation with Elena and two physicians recently recruited from Johns Hopkins, gesturing animatedly as he discussed some new innovation. The transformation in him went beyond his improved physical health. He moved with the energy of a man who had discovered meaning beyond wealth accumulation. "Speaking of legacies," James said, drawing Zora's attention to the entrance where a group of nursing students was arriving. "Your first cohort of equity fellows is here." The 10 young faces, diverse in gender, race, and background, represented Zora's most personal initiative, a fellowship program specifically designed to support nursing students from underrepresented communities. Each would receive mentorship, financial support, and guaranteed placement at Manhattan Memorial upon graduation. As Zora greeted them, she felt the full circle moment. From the isolated nurse fighting a system determined to silence her, to a leader nurturing the next generation who would continue transforming that system from within. Later, as the crowd thinned and sunset painted the atrium in warm gold, James found Zora on the small balcony overlooking the hospital gardens. "Successful day," he noted, joining her at the railing. "Surreal day," she corrected with a small laugh. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up back in my old life, rushing between patients' rooms and wondering if anyone notices the disparities I'm seeing." James's hand covered hers on the railing. "Well, I'm grateful every day that you didn't stay silent. Not just for the patients whose lives you've changed, or even for Howard, but for myself." He turned to face her fully. "Meeting you has changed me, Zora." The simple honesty in his voice touched something deep in her heart. Throughout her career, Zora had been the one caring for others, patients, her daughter, her colleagues. Being cared for, being truly seen, was still an adjustment. "Are we really doing this?" she asked quietly. "Us, I mean, with everything else going on." James smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way she'd come to cherish. "I think we've been doing this for months now. The question is whether we're ready to admit it." Before she could respond, a text chimed on her phone. Zuri, who had left earlier with friends, "Don't work too late. And tell James he's still coming to dinner Sunday, right?" Zora laughed, showing him the message. "Apparently my daughter has decided for us." "Smart girl," James replied. "Takes after her mother that way." As night settled over the hospital that had become the center of a national conversation about healthcare equity, Zora felt a peace she hadn't known in years. There were still battles ahead, policies to implement, resistance to overcome, minds to change. But for the first time, she wasn't fighting alone. Howard Stark's collapse had been the catalyst, but the transformation belonged to all of them. Every person who had chosen courage over comfort, truth over security, change over the status quo. Zora thought of her mother's journal, now preserved in the hospital's historical collection alongside documentation of the systemic changes it had inspired. One life, one voice, one moment of courage had created ripples that would touch thousands of patients for generations to come. As James's arm slipped around her waist, Zora leaned into his strength, allowing herself the simple pleasure of being supported rather than always doing the supporting. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. Home. The word held new meaning now. Not just the apartment she shared with Zuri, but this sense of purpose, this community of allies, this man beside her who had seen her at her most vulnerable and most powerful and chosen to stand with her through both. "Yes," she replied, turning toward the future they would build together. I'm ready. If this story of courage, transformation, and justice touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I'd love to know which moment resonated most with you. And if you haven't already joined our Ducal family, subscribe now to never miss these stories of triumph and redemption that remind us how one person's courage can change countless lives.